Flatland.
Really? Well, here we are.
Indeed, here we are. And you heard a bit of the voice of our guest tonight, our literally last-minute guest, Terry Dowling. But we'll get to Terry Dowling in a minute. He gets to catch his breath while Mel and I fight.
Are we going to fight?
I don't know, are we?
I don't know. Why don't you start? We'll see if we're going to fight.
What we're going to do is review the newest Star Trek novel published by Timescape Books. It's called The Wounded Sky, and it's by Diane Duane. In my humble, obsequious, and always non-committal opinion, it may be, with the possible exception of Vonda McIntyre's novel, it may be the best Star Trek novel ever written, and I include in that not only the ones from Timescape, but Blish's original novel on the subject. I think it's a rattling good story. I think that she used the characters and the situation to the utmost, and I think that it, in my opinion at least, closely parallels, if not surpasses, what Roddenberry had in mind for the characters of the Enterprise. And I recommend this book unabashedly, wholeheartedly, strongly, and any other adjectives or adverbs you care to throw in there. I like it. Mel?
Well, I'm not quite as uncritical about it as you are.
Go ahead.
Okay. I mean, what I mean is, you are a critic, and you were criticizing it in your own funny way. But I mean, I'm critical in the sense that I think that there are definitely things wrong with it. It's definitely a good piece of writing. I think Diane Duane is a fine writer. This book has something that many of the other Star Trek novels don't have, and that is a sense of wonder about it. It's not just sort of a plotting version of the TV show. There's a lot of very strange and wonderful stuff in here. There is, in particular, a space battle between the Enterprise and the Klingons that will positively curl your hair. There's a big finish. It's got a lot of fine things in it. However, and this is, for me, a very large however, none of the characters, not one of the characters in the book, except maybe Spock, read the way I read them. They are not the characters as I know them from the TV show or either of the movies. In particular, and I think that this is an enormous flaw in the book, Jim Kirk, who is the captain of this starship, is in this book very, very passive. He doesn't actually do anything. The decisions that he makes are, from at least a dramatic point of view, foregone. If he makes another decision, the book ends, and then they have another couple of chapters to go. He spends most of his time on the Enterprise just kind of wandering around and looking out the window and mooning and just kind of saying, gee, isn't it wonderful to be here on the starship, kind of thing. One of the real strange things that he does is that there's a character in here who runs the recreation deck, which is fine. I can stand a ball monitor on the Enterprise. But the thing that's strange about this is that somehow, emotionally, he seems to take the place of Dr. McCoy. And Dr. McCoy's in the book. They just don't use him to the full extent that I would have thought that he would have been used. And if this gentleman who runs the recreation deck had not been in there, perhaps McCoy would have had a bigger part. There is, in particular, the same space battle that will curl your hair, and is just a wonderful piece of writing, I agree. But the big flaw in it is that Captain Kirk, at this critical point, turns the ship over to Mr. Sulu to outmaneuver the Klingons. And I do not see Jim Kirk or any other Starfleet captain, any captain of a starship in any book that's not entirely a wimp, giving command of a ship to any of his senior officers or a junior officer or anybody else during this critical time. That just read entirely wrong to me. That was sort of the beginning of me thinking that maybe she wasn't reading the characters in the same way I was. And I said, well, okay, it's a terrific book except for the Star Trek stuff. And then it occurred to me that any captain of any large ship that's going through the void, if he gives his ship over at a critical time, if he goes mooning around his ship without making decisions, letting everybody else do the work, that's not a good story, unless it's about this wimpy captain. And so there were a lot of character things about this book that I did not appreciate and did not enjoy. Also, there, as far as smaller things go, there was a very much of a rabbit out of the hat that she pulls out at the end, which I cannot tell you what it is, lest I ruin it for you. But there is something that happens at the end that she sort of sets up, but is not quite believable because it's too good to be true. I mean, it's possible, but it's too good to be true. The other thing is that there is some talk about breaking the laws of physics. That whatever this new drive, I think they call it the inversion drive. I don't recall. Whatever that is, breaks laws of physics, and there's a lot of talking about doing that. And I said, well, yeah, that's real interesting. And then it occurred to me that you can't break the laws of physics. What you can do, just as you say an airplane breaks the law of gravity, not true. What it does is it uses other means to fight against gravity, but gravity is always still there. I don't think it's possible to break the
quote.
Yes?
From Theodore Sturgeon, which Diane Duane may have heard in this regard.
What is that?
E = mc squared may be a local phenomenon.
Okay, that's fine. But that doesn't...
It does. It strikes at the very heart of the whole
No, it doesn't, because wherever you go in the universe, even if the laws of physics are different from the ones that we observe here on Earth, they are still the laws of physics.
But we don't know what those laws may be.
No, but that's not what she's saying. She's not saying the laws of physics are different. She's saying that there are moments when you can break them, and I don't think that that's ever true.
Well, the whole concept of the drive involves that, I think.
No, they're just using laws of physics that are there. Just as electricity uses laws of physics that are there, just as jet airplanes use laws of physics that are there. I don't think it's possible ever to break laws of physics because they're there and they're part of the universe. You can use them, you can discover new ones, you can use old ones in new ways, but you cannot break them. I really find that very difficult to believe. So these are the things that I find wrong with this book, and though I think that these things are real, that there's a problem with the characterization, that there's some, although boy, her physics is real strange and interesting. I don't want to get into that too. I don't want to knock that too much because a lot of her ideas are very, very interesting, and her crystal spider is very charming.
Yes.
But with all that, there are problems with it. I don't think it's by any means the perfect Star Trek novel or even a perfect novel. I think it's a nice piece of work. I think it's interesting to read as long as you keep in mind that, well, you can judge for yourself whether
Captain Kirk in here is not Mel Gilden's Captain Kirk.
Well, but I don't think he's anybody's Captain Kirk.
He's Diane Duane's.
Well, I think that...
And
that's...
I thought about the observing thing when you pointed that out, because I had noticed the same thing. I hadn't paid as
He's very, very passive in this book.
He is passive, and I think there may be, I don't know what it is, but there may be a reason for it.
Not that I can see.
It's not inherent in the book,
Can you explain to me why he lets Mr. Sulu run the ship?
Well, I can come up with a theory. Whether it's the one she used, I don't know.
Well, all right. She tried to set that up, but I just didn't buy it.
No, my theory is very simple.
What is that?
You got to give him experience sometime.
My God, not when 8 Klingons are attacking at once.
Well, otherwise it doesn't make any difference.
No.
Otherwise it's just punting across a lake.
There was none of that in the book. That never crossed his mind. There's a lot of internal monologue for Jim Kirk, and that never crossed his mind.
It's not in print, that's what I say.
No,
but
it's not in print.
Anyway, buy it and see it for yourself. It's called The Wounded Sky.
It is well worth reading with all its flaws, and I look forward to Diane's other work, Star Trek and non. Real interesting.
Something just occurred to me.
What is that?
I don't know. I don't want to say at the moment, but
okay. Anyway, that's my feeling, and that's Mike's feeling, and
okay. So check it out and see what you think.
Check it out. But it's as I say, it's well worth reading, and
that space battle alone makes it worth it.
The space battle alone is very good, no matter who's in charge of the Enterprise. It's real interesting, and things happen that you would never expect. Yeah. It's a nice piece of work, and what did you? And she's not very old, Diane, is it? I don't know.
This is she has written
well, 2 novels, and
two
this
novels,
is her third.
And this is her third, and she has a sequel coming out to.
And there's one about the kids novel that she wrote about. So You Want to Be a Wizard, I think.
Yeah,
it's
that's
called.
her second.
Yeah. No. There's two Door Into books. There's Fire and
Door Into Fire has been published. The second,
Door Into
the
Shadow.
sequel.
Didn't Anne McCaffrey say she'd read it?
Yeah, in manuscript.
Oh, in manuscript. Oh, okay. That'll be out soon.
Yeah, and that's the one, because her first novel, Door Into Fire, was a hell of a good read.
Yeah, and this is
excellent
too,
read. Well, okay.
With the flaws that I've stated, and the reservations that I have about it, she's a very good writer, and I think she's likely to get better, and will probably be a force for good in our time.
I think so.
Yeah.
Also, she's a neat person.
Yeah, that's true too.
You don't care about that. You're just concerned what's in the Timescape book.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, our guest is Terry Dowling, and I don't know a hell of a lot about Terry Dowling, but I know the following. He is a fan and a professional in Australia. He has twice won the Ditmar Award this year, or last year, wasn't it?
This year.
This year. for Best Short Fiction and Best Criticism.
That's right.
And
Who
he
is
is...
Dit-
We'll get to that in a second.
Ditmar
We're going to get to that.
Oh,
And he is
okay.
currently here in Los Angeles. He's editing an anthology with Harlan Ellison of Australian SF.
It's called Down Deep, Stories of Future Australis, which is trying to showcase Australia to the world in a science fiction way. So,
Okay. Well, let's start with Mel's question, which is also mine. What is the Ditmars Award? For whom is it named, etc.?
it's named after, now, you caught me out. I forget his name, but his name, I think, surname was Ditmar.
I sure hope so.
Good.
Right, and we now call it the Australasian Achievement Award, Science Fiction Achievement Award. We're trying to get away from the word Ditmar, but everyone calls it a Ditmar, and a Ditmar it is. It's just like trying to
No
change
funnier
it.
than a Hugo.
That's right, or an Oscar. It's just, so that's it.
What did he do? Was there a fella named Ditmar?
He gave the money for the first
Oh.
awards.
Well,
He funded
sure.
it, and so it's named after him.
He who has the gold makes the rules.
Uh-huh.
That's right.
His idea.
Okay.
And it's worth winning. It's nice to win it.
Is it given by fans?
It is. It's the same as the Hugo. Fans attending the national convention vote for it.
Mhm.
There is no Hugo in this country for criticism per se, and yet there is in Australia. I think it's a damn good idea. Where did you publish your criticism? What did you critique?
Well, it's an article on Jack Vance. I'm co-editing a journal myself in Australia. So it's a pretty healthy scene over there, but we miss on a few points. We don't have as big a choice. Our fiction nominations are much smaller,
Mhm.
and there aren't a lot of people doing a lot of writing. So
I was thinking about that when you were driving over here. I was thinking, all right, now let's see. Australian science fiction writers. Bert Chandler has been on the show a couple of
Yeah.
times. But if you stopped a casual customer in a science fiction bookstore and said, name Australian science fiction writers, they would go, and I was thinking of David Lake,
right.
Sherry Wilding. I think she's
Wilder,
Australian.
yeah.
Wilder. See, that's how, and that's it. That's my list.
Right. What about
Uh,
Damien Broderick? Have you heard the name?
I have heard the name, but I don't think I've read anything he's done.
He's got the Dreaming Dragons out, which is talking about the Aboriginal Dreamtime, which is a pretty fertile area.
I guess so.
Yes.
Did you hear? Maybe you didn't hear Harlan's show when he came back from
Harlan was
Australia.
on the program
I didn't,
and
but
talked about it.
I travelled with
A lot
Harlan.
of
He came to Australia.
craziness.
We
Yeah,
had
yeah.
We'll talk about that later. I want to hear
Yeah.
your side of it, because we heard Harlan's.
I hope he's not listening.
I hope he
But,
is.
it's a big country. It's as big as the States, as you probably know, and very few people. So we don't have as many writers.
The writers that you do have, is there some sort of commonality about them, or are they as disparate as American or British or European?
Well, we're heavily influenced by the Americans and the British, but more the Americans. We copped a lot of American paperbacks. We get the influences from there. So we haven't got our own identity yet, and that's the big deal. We're trying to find our own feeling.
Is it difficult as a professional? I mean, when I see market reports for British magazines, say, I tend to say, well, I don't really want to send it to that. You got to send it across the Atlantic Ocean, and you got to have coupons to send it back, and yeah, it costs a lot
Sure.
of money, and you know, do you have that same kind of feeling when you submit to American magazines?
Well, to answer your question, I haven't done that, no.
Oh, you haven't done that?
No, I brought some stories with me, and I've sent a few off.
Uh-huh.
But in Australia, we have a magazine which is more or less the Australian equivalent of Omni, which is called Omega, and that's our main showcase over there now, and that's the bigger bucks.
How many stories do they buy in a month?
Well, they only come out bi-monthly, so you're
Oh.
getting two pieces of fiction only, so it's not a turnover. There's no markets.
But if it's just you and these three other people, I mean, you know, you can be a magazine every month.
Well, things are improving, as I say.
Yes.
What about Australian fans?
They're like fans here. They're like fans everywhere.
Are there many of them?
A big convention would probably have about 500, which is small time for you
Yeah.
folks. But as you know, the WorldCon's going to be over there in '85.
Yes.
So we expect a big response. We're getting more action from New Zealand too, and different places like that. Australia becomes a centre. Sydney, the East Coast mainly, becomes a centre for the for that geographical region. So we're getting people. We call it Australasian Science Fiction Awards now. You see, an Australasian Science Fiction Convention. So it's a long way away. So we're getting a local centre. Yeah.
Bert Chandler, when he was here, said that he got a real big reception in Japan.
The Japanese love him. And they phone him up and ask him how many buttons are on Commodore Grimes' uniform and so on. He can't explain why the Japanese love him so much. But
Is it just his character, or is it science fiction in general? I mean, do you know anything about Japanese science fiction?
no, I don't. Only from their movies. And that looks,
Most movies are weird.
I don't know. I can't explain that. Nor can Bert, actually. I don't know if he said that on the program, but
Essentially, yeah.
he just can't work it out. But he's thrilled silly, and he loves going over there, and they treat him so well.
Yeah.
In Britain, science fiction writers are more highly thought of than they are here. Is that the case in Australia?
No, not at all. in Britain, I guess you're saying that, Mike, because in Britain you've got that whole literature background,
That's
haven't you,
right,
with,
right,
with
that whole
Kingsley
Oxford,
Amos and
Cambridge,
Anthony
yes,
Burgess and all
yes.
that. In Australia, where a lot of people at universities, a lot of campus authors, that's where most of them sprung from, I believe. So there is that kind of nervousness. We want to be respectable. Same thing as in Britain. I think I prefer the American outlet because there are less limitations on it. And a good writer comes out, surfaces. Quality will out all the time.
Yeah, yeah. I was talking to a fellow a science fiction writer from Hawaii, as a matter of fact, and we were discussing the possibility of doing Hawaiian science fiction, you know, just as Poul Anderson has been doing Danish science fiction,
Sure.
you know, for years. And usually it comes out fantasy, but sometimes it's science fiction. Is there such a thing as Australian science fiction just yet? I mean, can you use the mythos? You have a Hanging Rock T-shirt on, for instance. Would you be able to write a pretty good science fiction or fantasy story about Hanging Rock or some other part of the mythology of Australia?
Good question, Mel, because it's exactly the kind of thing we're hoping to do in this book, Down Deep,
Mhm.
Stories of Future Australis. We're hoping to take this land, which is unknown comparatively, and it's got Paleolithic tribesmen. That's what the Aboriginals are. I mean, I'll say that with all respect. It's not even an issue. But they are a very primitive people, and they go back ages. And we've got a very, very unique mythology. It's unlike any other mythology in the world. The Dreamtime idea. There are no, for instance, there are no future predictions in Aboriginal mythology. Never predict the future. So you've got this amazing diversity, primitive tribes, and you've got these mysteries. So it's a great thing for building up a whole new, what can I call it, a unique background. So.
And, well, for instance, have you written stories about that sort of thing?
Just to finish one, hoping that Harlan Ellison, are you listening, will choose it for the book.
Which book?
This
The
is
Australia's
Down
book,
Deep,
of
Down
course.
Deep.
I was going to say, I keep thinking about Last Dangerous Vision. Say, my God, that must be closed, you know?
No, that's clear.
Yeah,
That's on its way.
Yes, it
That's
really
doing
is.
well.
I told you, didn't I?
Yeah, it's alive and well.
Well,
How many submissions, how many manuscripts are you looking at for the book, and how many will be in it?
We'd like to try for 20 stories, say about 5 American authors who have visited as guests of honour. The idea is to find some American writers who have been there and love the place. I can speak for Joe Haldeman. He was there and had a great feeling for it.
And for Harlan as well.
Harlan, definitely for Harlan. I know Jack Vance was there too. I took Jack Vance around the country a bit too, and you've got to push him. I'm going to have to see him later in the month to coerce him to do a piece for us.
Yeah.
I know Robert Silverberg was there, and he looks like trying tribal structure that you had with the American Indians when the white men came here. You had a pretty sophisticated native culture already.
Which
How's-
we did our best to destroy.
Yeah, well, we didn't have to do that. The Aboriginals just walked away. The moment the white men landed at Sydney Cove, the Aboriginals just moved back into the desert. We never had any crisis with them. Maybe once in a while they'd raid a homestead, but that's it. Just no interaction, no collision, no revolution.
And there's no major god of the Aborigines, some guy, the Great Spirit, you know, whatever.
There were some fascinating characters. There's the Bunyip, the shape changer. There is the clever man and the people maker. There are constant myths between the tribes, but nothing as big as, say, the Great Spirit to American tribes, Manitou and all the rest.
And in getting back to your lack of a cultural identity, you can't exactly sit down and say, "Hey, here's our cultural identity as it's outlined in these stories here." It's something which each writer has to find for him herself.
Yes.
And so all you can do is stake out your own, and say, to whatever extent you want to say it, here's my universe. Come play in it.
Yes. Yes. And I'm an
It happens to
Australian.
be Australian,
and
yeah.
That's my
Yeah.
perspective.
Have to invent one first.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh.
So
But on the other hand, if you have this tribal structure and you have hundreds of tribes and each of them has their own ideas about things, that seems incredibly rich.
you can only write so many stories about the Aboriginals.
Well, that's
then
true.
You become limited by doing that.
Yes, I
And everyone will
suppose.
expect you to be an Australian because you write about Aboriginals in some kind of futuristic or fantasy setting. You can't do that either.
Didn't Dick Lupoff write a story about that? About the Australian Aborigines being the only ones who could stand the cosmic rays, or something. It was a real strange tale. I'm trying to remember what the title was. But I'd bet that Dick Lupoff wrote a short story or a novel that had some Australian theme.
Well, we will ask the group mind.
Ask the group mind, yeah, because I remember this story. I remember him talking about it.
This is the mythos we've been talking about. There's a mythos connected with this program, Terry, and it is that everybody who is listening is a cell in a sentient computer, which we call the group mind. And we have yet to find a question they can't answer. So if we will find out.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, let's go to the phones, shall we?
All right.
Our telephone number is 985-5735. The area code is 213, and what we're going to do is keep that line open, or just let them ring. So when we answer it, you will be on the air, so just be prepared to sit and wait for a long time and let it ring. Try not to fall asleep, though, okay?
That way you don't have to pay for it until we answer.
That's right.
That's
That is
right,
correct.
yeah.
Okay, and our guest is Terry Dowling. He's Australian. We're talking about Australian science fiction and whatever else crosses our lips. All right, let's go to the phones. Hour 25, you're on the air.
Hello, mate. Hello, Daddy. Just want to make you feel it. I'm going to sing you a little song. Emmanuel Kant was a real best Heidegger was a boozy beggar who could think you under the table. David Hume could out-consume Schopenhauer and Hegel. And Wittgenstein was a very swine who just a Schlotter Schlegel. There's nothing Nietzsche couldn't teach about the raising of the raised. Socrates himself was permanently pissed. Don't do it, Mill, on his own free will, on half a punish, I knew particularly ill. Whether they say could stick it away, have a great whiskey every day. Aristotle was a bugger, but wrong. Hot the spot of his ram. Every day they caught with drunken thought, I drink, therefore I am. Yes, Socrates himself would be particularly missed. A lovely little thing about a bugger when he's pissed. Now I have one last question. What's brown and sounds like a bell?
Dong.
Thank you.
Bless you, lad, bless you.
All right. Good night, huh?
Good night.
Oh my God, Mike, where do they come from?
That was a hard question.
Yeah, I think so. It's an old Monty Python question.
I know.
Yeah.
Hour 25, you're on the air.
Hi, Mike. This is Rich Mueller.
Hello, Richard.
Oh, Richard, don't you say hello to me,
No,
you doo-doo.
no.
Well, I don't know which one's on the phone.
Richard is a writer.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, what have you got for us, Richard?
Space War Blues by Lou Pov.
Bingo.
Boy, that's the Aboriginal story.
Space War Blues.
No, the Space War Blues was based on the little old New Alabama.
Right, and that Aboriginal context is in Space War.
Oh, it is?
Yes.
Pretty sure.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
I don't recall it, but you may be right.
I think it's to do with the pigmentation, and they eventually become gray.
Okay, that sounds right. Yeah. Anyway, then he's obviously somebody you should look up.
Right.
He lives
right.
in Berkeley, I think.
Okay.
Dick Lupov.
Okay.
Yeah.
A question, a comment, an opinion?
Not particularly. I'm just enjoying it very much, and I want to hear much more about Australia, because for me that's another planet.
This man wears a hat with the side up.
Bless you, lad, bless you.
Well, has nothing to do with carrying my rifle over my shoulders, because I used to ride horseback, and the thing would flop in my face if I didn't.
I see. Okay. All right. I should have asked
Okay.
sooner.
All right. Thanks for calling. Interesting concept. Australia is another planet, he says.
Well,
Is
if-
it?
well,
Could
when-
it be?
Pogo went there. Did you ever read the Pogo story about going to Australia?
No, I didn't, Mel. Go. Educate me.
Do you know who Pogo is?
I know who Pogo is.
Okay,
Yeah.
Pogo, they did a whole sequence about they wanted to go to the moon, and they built the spaceship, and it went to Australia instead.
Thanks, mate.
And it was real. I bet you Harlan has a copy of it. I would bet Harlan has a copy of it at his house.
When
somewhere.
you pay the plane fare to come here and go back, it feels like it's another planet.
feels
let
like
me tell you.
another planet, yeah.
Let me tell you.
Yeah.
All right, let's go back to the calls. Hour 25, you're on the radio.
It never occurred to me before. I always liked the idea of pantheism, that putting things into the Great Spirit is a form of desensitization.
Yeah.
And so I'll hang up and let you talk about it.
All right.
Yeah, I guess one of the trends in civilization has been to tidy up our mythologies a bit. I know the ancient Egyptians did that. They got all their local totem tribal gods and melded them together into
Really?
Ra and all the rest. So I don't think the Aboriginals ever did that. They were always two small tribal unit.
And far apart, too,
They never
I
had
guess.
meetings. They never came together the way the great Indian nations did.
Hmm.
So they wouldn't interact very often. They'd raid one another and carry off women every now and then, but that would be the extent of it.
Was there an Aboriginal sign language so they could communicate, or did they do it with
Trading
axes?
language of some kind.
There were signals. There were facial signals and gestures, if they couldn't understand one another's dialects. But nothing. No trade. You made what you needed, and you carried it with you. And the woman would carry fire on a stone, and that would be her responsibility to keep that burning.
They couldn't make it if it went out.
No, but it was difficult to make fire.
Huh.
Don't forget Paleolithic man, whereas I think the Red Indians would have been Neolithic at least, but high New Stone Age.
Yeah.
That's what we're up against. But pantheism never got started in Australia. It never did, even though you can compare the different tribal myths and find that they will have a fire god and they will have a storm deity. That's because those elements were common to all of the tribes.
What about the creation myths? Are there any similarities there?
No, I mean, you'll say a giant frog created the earth this time, or another tribe will say that a giant kangaroo, giving it a name, an Aboriginal god's name, it'll come as a kangaroo and create.
I want to ask you a question. You're the person who knows this.
Good.
Hey,
You finally caught on to the idea of the program. 2 years he's been doing it.
Do you know, I used to listen to the commercials for, what is the Australian airline? Qantas. For Qantas. And this guy with the beautiful, Robin somebody, who does the Qantas commercials. I think he used to...
This was before the koala.
Yeah. And
right,
he's the same guy that used to do the San Miguel beer commercials. I think his name was Robin something. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Beautiful voice. Nice representation. And they used... One of the commercials, they would play music of the didgeridoo, which I guess is a native Australian musical instrument.
Yes.
What does it look like?
It is just a long wooden tube, a hollowed-out length of trunk.
Yeah.
About as round, say, the diameter of an orange.
Yeah.
And the Aboriginal just echoes his voice down it, making a noise down a long tube.
Oh.
And you get this really rich resonance, and they held it with their feet, between their feet and their hands, and they would just drone down it. And you had the clicking sticks going with that, so you ended up with a,
Really?
Yeah, and they had the bull roarer as well, which gave them, so that was the music, that was the extent of it.
Yeah, it's a whole different music than anything we have in the West.
Well, that's primitive music too, the drone and the simple rhythms.
Like the Indian.
I mean, it hardly even fits into toot, whistle, plunk, boom.
Closest analogy I can think of is a chauffeur.
Yeah, even though, but that's done with your lips pursed. It's like playing a trumpet.
I didn't know that. It was just long.
No, you can't, because there's nothing there. I mean, it has no mouthpiece of any kind.
I must scream. Oh well. All right, let's go back to the phone.
Harlan has one at his house, actually.
I wouldn't be. Oh, a didgeridoo?
Yeah.
Really?
A small one. Yeah.
Wow.
Must be
I'm
him to
fascinated by the sound. It's an incredible sound.
Did you hear Kate Bush's song, The Dreaming? that was
No.
done? Right, great song. Excellent song. And they got Ralph Harris to play didgeridoo on the back of it.
Timey Kangaroo Down
No.
Sport.
This is catch the Kate Bush song. It's
Yes?
on the album The Dreaming. It's
Okay.
I think it's called The Dreaming.
You have it?
He knows.
Do you have it with you? No, we don't have it. Okay.
All right. Okay, let's go back. Hour 25, you're on the air.
Well, hello.
Yes.
Hi.
go
Hello.
ahead.
First, I'd like to say that as far as your friend Mel's reduction of cognitive experience to oxygen deprivation, you can find an expert in the so-called biological who can reduce any kind of that kind of experience as something as true as oxygen deprivation.
Well, listen, I'm not tied to that explanation. I mean, that's not graven in stone. It's just
Person
another.
isn't that good a
Not that
friend.
you're not. I'm just saying that lots of people will do that with anything like that.
Yeah.
Sure will.
Talk show ad absurdum.
I'm wondering how hopeful your guest is about your authors getting their own voice and kind of getting out from under the influences.
I guess we can't help but get it. It's one of these things. We're very self-conscious about it at the moment because we don't really have an identity that we can market. We've got a second-hand American-British one. But as in all nations, you just can't remain neutral. You can't remain a copy. And even as I'm talking, Australia is becoming a very, very distinctive nation. It's neither British nor American. And yet I think an Englishman or an American going to Australia would find themselves reasonably comfortable. They'd recognise enough of it to feel, well, this isn't so alien. I've even heard Americans coming back saying, well, they ain't got anything over there we ain't got here, To them it's just not...
Would you say it's just a matter of time then before you...
Sure I do. And I'm being very low-key about this because nothing's worse than somebody coming to another land and raving about their own country. Australia has real problems, but they're really new problems, and they're going to be solved by the people themselves, and it's going to be a good future. For the next 50 years, I think Australia's a good country to live in. I don't know, I say that simply because the way the world's heading, it seems to be a nice... No, I don't mean that with
Yeah.
the world talk in mind, but I think it looks healthy at the moment.
I was going to ask you kind of a geographical question. Like around the coast, how's that different from the inside?
The coast,
In, like...
well,
kind of...
the interior is desert, and it's very low desert, so that we could very easily have had an inland sea. And you'll find that a lot of well, science fiction stories, or a lot of writers have considered writing stories in which the inside of Australia gets flooded, and we do make an inland sea of it.
Was it ever flooded? I mean, do you find seashells and
We
remains
do.
of
There are
fish and
salt
things?
lakes and there are fossils,
Yeah.
so it was a flooded.
It was.
Are
Yeah.
the coasts kind of temperate?
Yes, well, Sydney is a warm temperate climate, and we have Brisbane, which is in Queensland. That's up in the-
Brisbane.
Brisbane is the capital of
I
Queensland.
always say Brisbane. I'm obviously
No,
saying it wrong.
You say Melbourne, too.
Yes, I do.
No, it's
Yeah.
Melbourne.
Okay.
See, this is
No,
the-
you're educating me. Go right
It's
ahead.
in London, Holborn.
Uh,
The L is only there for laughs.
but we have the tropical. Queensland is a tropical state with great beach resorts. The Gold Coast, it's just like any tropical paradise you could name. So, the coast is very, very well settled, generally speaking. It's a
So when the Europeans first got there, were the Aborigines kind of living kind of a forest hunter-gatherer thing before they started moving back into the desert?
Yeah, they were hunter-gatherers, and they were on the coast. There was a tribe called the Arunta Aboriginals who occupied Sydney. But as I say, apart from one or two throws of spears, that was it. They just went inland and didn't trouble the whites at all.
Yeah, so they must have, for their own culture, they must have had to make a big change between living in forest and having to adapt to a desert then. Isn't it?
Well, no, they did go into the desert. So there is a lot of desert land there, and the Aboriginals tend to prefer it. That's where all their sacred grounds are, and that's why when the white men took over, they gave the Aboriginals some reservations, more or less like the States. And Arnhem Land is a desert, largely desert, and that's their tribal land by choice. So,
By choice.
by choice. They can live in the desert. An Aboriginal can survive in the desert brilliantly.
They know what plants to eat and
Water, they can find water.
Yeah.
One last question. How does Philip K. Dick stuff sell in Australia?
Brilliantly.
Does he?
Love the man very much. It's a pity he's not with us. Phil Dick was going to do a preface to one book of short stories published in Australia called Dreamworks by an Australia Press, this publishing house I mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, he died before that book could be done. It's dedicated to him. Yeah, he was.
Working on it?
He saw all the stories and he approved the manuscripts, but that was it. That was all he had time to do. He sells well. He sells well.
Good.
Yeah, it is good. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for calling.
Thank you.
Hour 25, you're on the radio.
Oh, beautiful. This is Ventura County calling.
Oh my.
Question for your guest. You were talking about the native publishing in Australia, and for me, one of the big elements of that is, of course, freedom of expression, and I'd like your guest to talk about, I guess, the Australian equivalent of the First Amendment.
I'm sorry, he's not permitted to do that. Go ahead. Is there...
We don't have that same kind of background. We've never had to have it proclaimed like the First Amendment in this country. But because the Americans went for these rights, Australia tended to get them anyway. Because we had the British constitutions passed on to us, and we watched the American example, of course. So when we drafted our own constitution, we made sure that we had all the democratic rights. So it's a pretty good sort of political situation and personal liberty situation. I don't know whether that answers your question.
Well,
but
to put it more specifically, you've never had a case of books that have been banned or repressed.
no, not really.
I guess the one that immediately comes to mind is Lady Chatterley's Lover, of course.
We went through a very conservative time with that, so yeah, we did. But we were really reflecting the British market tastes there. When the British were cautious, we were cautious. Although some books have hit Australia before they've hit America in that regard, from Britain, say. Just like we got Monty Python long before the Americans took it on, for instance. So it's an uneven thing. Yes and no to answer your question. We've had inherited problems.
Is that the equivalent of a British press council?
Yes, there is. I'm not too au fait with that, actually, but yes, there is.
Okay, you mentioned that book, The Plains. What was the author's last
Gerald
name?
Murnane, Murnane.
M-A-N-A-N-E.
N-A-N-E. It really is quite a fascinating book.
I'm going to look for it.
And there was a short story by Murnane called Land Deal.
Land
Deal, which I think could be the best story about Aboriginals written.
Oh.
It's more or less an interview with Aboriginals and having them talk about how naive of the white men to think that we could not have imagined things like steel. We have imagined everything. We have imagined mirrors. We didn't need you to give us mirrors or trade mirrors for our service. We know what a mirror is. We've looked in a stream and we've imagined what a super stream would be like that would reflect our image. It's an incredible short story called Land Deal.
One last question. You mentioned that very good movie, The Year of Living Dangerously. I was wondering if you could comment on how the situation it's based on, what the reaction was in Australia. I believe it was the repression in Indonesia after the death of Sukarno.
It was that, yes. And
I'll get off now.
Okay, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
No, I was going to say Peter Weir had a lot of trouble in the making of that film, of course, because of the Muslim element in Indonesia. He had to finish making it in Australia, actually. But that film was received very differently in Australia. We did not like it as much as his other work. A lot of people felt that he had sacrificed his vision. I actually interviewed Peter Weir for the journal that I co-edit, and he talked about being approached about doing The Thornbirds and turning it down. He wants to do a science fiction movie. In fact, he had been approached about making Alien, Who Goes There, as a remake before John Carpenter got it. And he was fascinated with it and wanted to do it. And really, he's waiting for a perfect script to come his way, a science fiction script. But he's fascinated with it. He writes all the stories, as you may know, himself. And he's really hot. He really likes science fiction a lot.
Well, that's good to hear.
He reads it then.
He doesn't really read it, no. He knows the authors. He knows of Ballard and Asimov. When I mention them, he knows Philip K. Dick's name, but he's never gone into reading it, which may be part of why he's so effective, because he hasn't had anyone else contaminate his views.
Maybe so. I have something else from the group mind. The gentleman who did the Qantas commercials, and I suspect also the San Miguel commercials, was Robin King. And it's,
good on you, group mind. That's marvelous.
That's his name, Robin King, and that strikes me as being correct. And it says here he's a relative of Edgar Casey, which is, so thank you, whoever sent that in. Thank you very much.
Hour 25, you're on the radio.
Hi, Terry. Hi, gentlemen.
Hi.
My name's Don. I'm an Australian living in LA.
Good on you, mate.
Yeah, right. I happened to hear the radio show with Harlan, and I remarked to a friend of mine that I have had very similar experiences in Australia myself. And I don't know whether you know the mountains around Omeo, which is in southeastern Australia. I found it was a very kind of a powerful area.
Is this in Victoria, Don?
Yeah, that's in Victoria. Yeah. I've remarked to that even before I heard the radio program. I've remarked to people here that I found that to be the case when I was in the mountains. Very amazing.
Yeah, good. Yes.
As an Australian, when you heard Harlan talking about it, did it tell you anything about your country or that area or that milieu that you didn't know? Or did it strike a familiar chord and say, yeah, that's right? Or was it something on the order of, how the hell does he know all this? He just showed up for 3 weeks.
Well, from what I think Harlan really, he really got onto something. I've never been in the Flinders Ranges, which is in South Australia. That's where he apparently, that's where he really got excited. And I've never been to Hanging Rock. The parts of the country that I'm talking about are more east and more in the mountains. But I don't know. I feel that I've had the same kind of feeling being in the mountains and I just had that feeling.
Well, I must say I envy you.
Yeah, thank you. Harlan really expressed it well. I had chills running down my back when he was explaining it. It was fantastic.
Anyway, thank you for calling.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Hour 25, you're on the air with Terry Dowling. Go ahead.
I have so many questions, but I'll keep it very succinct. The one that I really want to ask most is about the desert, the interior of Australia. Is it so desolate that you cannot make that desert bloom? And whether it is or isn't, do the science fiction writers in Australia write about that? Do they write about a future dystopia or utopia in a completely settled Australian continent, or about the clash between civilization moving into the desert and the Aborigines, that type of theme?
Yeah, it can be fertilized, to answer the first part of your question. you will find that there are seed pods and all the rest under the surface, so if moisture does come in one of the infrequent floods, it does blossom very, very quickly, spores, and dies again and stays under the soil. It's typical desert that way, apart from things like the Sahara and the Gobi where you don't have any life at all. It does have that capacity for life. As for writers writing about it, apart from that inland sea idea that I mentioned earlier, you'll get a few authors who will deliberately, if they're talking about extraterrestrials, they'll use that desert as being a place where the extraterrestrials hide themselves. I'm thinking of Moon in the Ground, and I'm thinking of the Dreaming Dragons that I mentioned by Damien Broderick earlier, where you actually have artifacts hidden beneath the surface of the desert that the Aboriginals used to tap into. And
my goodness, if it's as large and desolate as you say it is, that's certainly a possibility.
Oh yes, it's an exciting one.
Yeah.
It's when we were talking before about getting Australian science fiction stories, I think that may be the answer. Maybe writing about the deserts and just getting that feeling.
If I may say, that seems to be the difference perhaps in attitude between Americans and Australians, because certainly Americans never thought of America as a place to settle only on the coast for good or for bad. We decided to march over all of it and explore all of it and settle every little bit that we could, and never seemed to occur to American society through its all 200 years that it couldn't claim every bit of land.
Good point.
Good or bad.
Yeah, well, and that struggle that took place in the Americans from the east to the west coast really made the nation. We have nothing quite like that. And we're at the stage where you have Western Australia, so rich in minerals with its capital in Perth, and there is a very real movement going on in that city to try and be a different nation. I mean, that's not, I shouldn't talk about that too loudly, but apparently that sort of feeling is so strong. And a friend of mine went to teach there at one of their universities, and he left the hose on one day, and the Perthians came out and said, you shouldn't do that, you're not in the East, you know. And that's one of the first times he's ever experienced that alienation within his own country. Wow.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
KPFK, you're on the radio.
There's an old Sherman Oaks writer lying. He raises himself up on one elbow and he turns to his fellow writers and he says, "Climb that old hanging rock, Jock. Climb that old hanging rock.
Go on,
We'll be in for a shock, Jock. Oh, climb that old hanging rock. All together now, climb me kangaroo down. Kangaroo down. Sing along now, boys.
Bless you, lads. Bless you.
Climb me kangaroo down." Listen, fellas, I'm sorry. I really don't have any question. I have a voice and I must sing.
All right,
And
thank
to Australia. Well, I'll remember when I go to set my watch for dream time.
do it.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
That's a good title, isn't it?
Yeah.
Set your watch for dream time. That's
Yeah,
good.
not bad.
Take that, Harlan.
Can we
Hour
still
25,
Yeah.
you're on the air.
Yes, good evening.
Hello.
With the waiting in line, some of these dialogues get to be non sequiturs, don't they?
We've done entire programs that are non-sequitur. Anyway, go ahead.
Yes,
Rescue us from this.
I want to follow up on the didgeridoo, but I have to tell a little story. And the story is that I was working in Britain, and I was a commercial diver, and my partner and my roommate was from Australia. And he told me a story about the didgeridoo, and I wanted to add more to it. Evidently, they use the didgeridoo for spiritual experiences. Evidently,
Yes.
somewhat like the yogis do with their hyperventilation, getting in that state, and it's almost a chant to where they have spiritual experiences while they're playing the didgeridoo.
Yeah. I've heard that story too during corroborees, the sort of religious frenzy that most primitive tribesmen have had when they're doing that kind of dance, religious dance, either by drugs or chewing leaves or resin and things like that.
You got to know which leaves to chew.
Yeah, but I've heard that story, that fact too.
And also, when I was in Europe, I remember seeing a program about how a lot of the original tribes have been decimated and a lot of their folklore has been lost because of this. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, that has happened, and partly it's similar again with the Red Indians, where you had diseases brought in. The white men did bring disease in, and a lot of the Aboriginal...
Ottomans themselves, too.
Yeah, and there was a high rate of child death too, and that seemed to increase when white men came in the very first days. declined again now, of course, but for some reason the Aboriginals couldn't adjust to the white man's requirements for city living and so on. If you ever get the chance to see the film The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith, that shows, I think, better than I can describe what it was like for the Aboriginals to collide with the white men. They were just swallowed up, and they couldn't adjust, and they couldn't remain outside it. They were caught on the fringes of all the cities, all the towns.
Yeah, very poignant, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, a living poignancy, that one.
Yes, indeed.
All right. Thank you for calling. Hour 25, you're on the radio.
Yes, I have a quick comment. You were talking earlier about writers talking about Danish science fiction and Hawaiian science fiction, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I happen to know that there is some Western science fiction being written.
You mean like Cowboys and Indians?
Yeah, something like that. You boys are going to smile rather broadly at this, but Louis L'Amour has written a couple of them.
What are they called? L'Amour. Louis L'Amour.
Louis L'Amour. Yeah.
What are they called?
Well, one of them is called The Californios. It was written in 1974. And the other one was out some months ago. It was called The Lonesome Gods, and I don't know what that one's about.
You know what occurs to me? There was a movie, I guess it was last year or the year before, called Time Rider, which I guess could be classified as a piece of Western biker science fiction. Did you see it?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah, that was pretty fair.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I had. Rather. With that, I'll say see you when I see you.
See you later.
Good night. Hour 25, you're on the air.
I spent a couple of months down in Adelaide last year. It's really an amazing place. But the problem I ran into is every night when I'd go out, I'd get lost. And it took me several times before I finally realized it was because of whenever I'd look up into the night sky, the stars are all different.
Uh-huh.
And I was amazed to find that here I am, 20th century man, and I still navigate by the stars. But, of course, there's no North Star down there, so you can't look up and find where North is at night. You just
But
have
you've
to...
still got Orion, haven't you? You've got the pot, the Big Dipper.
Yeah. And you were talking earlier about the Australian people just beginning to wake up to their own possibilities, and I found that problem in Adelaide, which is a city of about 1 million people, or just under 1 million people, and yet all the people that I got to know down there thought of themselves as living in a very small town.
Yeah, you can walk out of Adelaide. That's the frightening thing.
Yeah.
It's a city.
Yeah.
It's a capital.
And I had a great idea for a story for your book. Correct me if I'm wrong, but haven't you built a fence across the country to
Yes.
keep the dogs up in the north from invading the south?
Yes.
Sounds like good material for a story. Like, reminds me of the Frank Herbert book, the Jesus Incident, where they have the perimeter and they have to keep all these vicious beasts out.
That's right. I remember that. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you very much for calling.
Thank you.
Good night. Hour 25, you're on the air.
And now for something completely different. I'd like to ask your guest a question. Since he comes from the other hemisphere, quite obviously they see a different part of the sky than we do up here. I wonder how has that influenced science fiction?
Well, you've asked me a good question. The story that I won the Ditmar for finishes with reference to a constellation you can only see in the southern hemisphere, and I was severely castigated for having used something so esoteric and unknown to people over here. Yeah, well, the Southern Cross is our big constellation. It's on our flag, and if we ever become a republic, when the Union Jack leaves it, our flag will be the Southern Cross. So we talk about that like you'd talk about the North Star. And what other constellations would you have here that you...
The only one I can recognize all the time is Orion.
Well, we have Orion.
I can do. Oh, you do?
We do. We have the Big Dipper.
Oh.
And that's at one horizon line, and we have the Southern Cross at the other, and we have Alpha and Beta Centauri and all the rest. But yeah, we're very sentimental about our stars, let me tell you. That's all. We've got so few of them. You know?
But the Aboriginal cultures, do they a lot of their mythology based on astronomy?
They do have a lot of sky gods. They never made, of course, they never had any kind of analysis of the stars in any sense, no observatories or anything like that. But they would give the stars names, and they would give them identities like an emu god and so on, who would come to Earth and give different things. They could use the stars. They could use the stars to get their bearings quite well, very well indeed. They made excellent trackers because of it.
Well, the stars say that we're out of time. Thank you very much for coming.
I'd like to ask him a short question. This is something that's been bothering me for years. The only song that I associated with Australia is Waltzing Matilda, and I have been told that is indeed not the national anthem of Australia.
No, Advance Australia Fair is.
Advance Australia Fair.
Yeah.
Would I recognize the tune if I heard?
Australia's sons, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. And so on.
And so on,
You know,
et cetera, et cetera. But it's not Waltzing Matilda.
No,
Not
but
Waltzing Matilda.
there's, it is, but it isn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we sing one, but when they're not looking, we sing the other.
Oh, Terry Dowling from Australia, in case you didn't guess. Our guest tonight on Hour 25. Terry, thank you very much for coming
been a lot
down
of fun,
literally
Mike.
at the last
Thanks.
minute and doing this.
Yes.
And I got lost. You see, I couldn't follow your style. I went down the San Diego freeway.
And all the water goes down the drain the wrong
It
direction.
does. And do you know why, Mel?
It's the Coriolis
That's
force.
right. It's the opposite magnetic pole.
No, it's not magnetic.
Well,
It's got to do with the way
opposite
the Earth spins.
Yeah, but we're in a different hemisphere.
Yeah.
So.
All right. I have a science fictional question to end the show with. We'll talk about it next week when we have open phones. There is an error in the NBC. You know have you seen the NBC nightly news thing? The news breaks they do at 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock, or are you signed out by that?
No.
Well, watch one during the coming week and tell me the mistake in it.
What, the logo that they have?
Yeah.
The mistake in it?
There's a mistake. See if you can spot it.
All right.
We'll do that next week. Now, next week, we're at 9 o'clock, we're going to be broadcasting from the Christmas Fair down at 1329 South Hope, I believe it is. And I'll be finishing that at 9:30, so you may have to start the program without me, Mel.
Yeah, well, we'll get Shepard in here next week, and we'll just talk about Easy TV.
So,
yeah,
I will be here as close to 10
We'll do
as I
some
can.
phones, and
Yes,
some
we'll do
calendar,
phones and some calendar and read
nattering,
various things.
whatever
sort of
comes up.
Another non-sequitur program.
Sounds good to me.
And, well, I gave you the long preview of coming attractions before, so we'll skip that. So, that's going to be it for tonight, and thank you for doing the show here.
Well, I think that was a swell idea to have Terry Dowling here. I had a good time.
I had a ball. I love it.
Yeah.
And if you tuned in for Harlan's reading of his vampire story, he's going to do that on January 6th on the anniversary show of Hour 25. When
We want everybody to
14th
come down
year.
and be there, too, at Dangerous Visions that night.
Yes.
That'd be excellent.
Come at 8 or 9 o'clock and just stand around and be weird and be up for the show when it starts.
Right. All right. Good night. We will see you next week. Stay tuned for Straight No Chaser.
Bye.